Hey, I'm Desney Tan, Vice President and Managing Director of Microsoft Health Futures. Welcome to the Health and Life Sciences track of the 2022 Microsoft Research Summit. Here at Microsoft, we're focused on empowering every person on the planet to live a healthier future. In this track, we'll be talking in depth about the evolution of technology and the future of health and the life sciences. We have a great day planned, and I hope you'll stay with us for all the sessions in today's track. In our first session today, I'll be chatting with two people whose vision, leadership, and expertise are transforming health and the life sciences. Najat Khan, Chief Data Science Officer and Global Head of R&D Strategy and Operations at Janssen, and Anthony Philippakis, Chief Data Officer at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. We'll learn more about how they're using new technologies to address some of the most challenging problems in this space. As the day progresses, we'll explore new computational advances in fields as diverse as protein engineering and biomedical imaging, and learn about how our fundamental knowledge of the immune system can be leveraged to develop a new class of disease diagnostics. We'll also share how our partnerships with research and clinical institutions are starting to drive change in the way healthcare is delivered. Along the way, we'll also discuss how technologies can be developed in a responsible, ethical, and equitable manner. I hope today's sessions inspire and excite you about the evolution of technology and the power it has to improve human health by transforming healthcare and the life sciences. After today, I hope you'll join us in our mission to empower every person on the planet to live a healthier future. Let's get started. As we look to the future of health and the life sciences, we recognize that the practice of medicine is an intricate balance of art and science. The time-honored physician-patient relationship is fundamental and timeless. The relationship between doctor and patient is grounded in the physical exam, history-taking, visual observation, palpation of the body, as a basis for understanding health, disease, and healing. Science and technology have evolved alongside the human practice of medicine and have deeply shaped medical care through the ages. Starting from empirical observations and intuition, scientists, engineers, and physicians have built tools not only to look more deeply into biological systems, but also to productively perturb them. This has deepened our understanding of fundamental biology, while also enhancing our ability to diagnose and treat disease. Just as Louis Pasteur's careful observations of microbes seeded our modern germ theory of disease, advances in the basic sciences have paved the way for many technological tools that we use in medicine. Methodologically, we start with empirical science, describing natural observations, which we sometimes refer to as the first paradigm of science. We then describe the world with theoretical models and generalizations, the second paradigm. In the last few decades, we've started using computational methods to simulate complex phenomena, the third paradigm of science, and have now entered into an era of data exploration, or data science, as well as machine learning and artificial intelligence, the fourth and perhaps fifth paradigms of science. This is an exciting time, and advances in data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence have the potential to transform the way life science research is done and the way healthcare is delivered. Now, in modern times, we have the technology to look at and into the human body in different ways, from the stethoscope to X-rays to MRIs to molecular sequencing, creating higher and higher resolution views of an individual's physiology and environment. When applied at the population level, new patterns emerge, widening and deepening our understanding of the determinants of health. Other technologies have enabled us to treat patients in completely new ways, from the rise of anesthesia and surgery to synthetic medications and even gene editing. While these trends have been decades in the making, recent advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence give us computational technologies that allow us to aggregate complex inputs from multiple data sources, with the potential to derive rich insights that rapidly expand our knowledge base and drive deeper discovery and faster innovation. As we consider how these technologies have shaped the practice of medicine, from the individual to the ecosystem level, we are reminded that no technology exists in a vacuum. Our core understanding of biological systems is rapidly evolving, and with it, our understanding of what technologies are relevant and useful. Simultaneously, the use of technology across the health and life science industries and the way healthcare is delivered is also rapidly changing. reshaping our traditional model of healthcare delivery from one of diagnosis and treatment to one that prioritizes prevention and individualized precision care. It's inevitable that advances in data science, artificial intelligence, and machine learning will continue to accelerate and evolve, but it remains an open question how we can best use and regulate these technologies in real-world settings and at scale across healthcare and the life sciences. It's hard to dispute the meme that artificial intelligence is the new electricity, or at least could be, and that AI has the potential to fundamentally transform industries, including health and the life sciences, in many ways in the same way electricity did. One of the often neglected parts of this analogy is how difficult it is to implement fundamentally new technologies, and how deep transformation is typically dependent on an ecosystem of factors that must be carefully tended to. In the case of electricity, Thomas Edison had built electricity generating stations in Manhattan and London by the 1880s, and was selling electricity as a commodity. It was immediately clear that this could and would revolutionize factories and manufacturing, but it ended up taking 30 to 40 years for significant adoption. One may ask why it took that long. Well, it turns out that factories of the time were physically designed around steam power. In most factories, a steam engine mechanically turned a drive shaft that ran along the length of the factory. Secondary shafts connected via an intricate collection of interconnected belts and gears drove hammers, punches, presses, and looms. Steam engines never stopped. If a single machine needed to run, the coal fires had to be fed. While owners could replace individual machines with electrical motors, this didn't give them the efficiency that they were hoping for. The factory needed to be completely redesigned for electricity. Once they were, electricity freed factories to be organized around logical production lines. Rather than being densely packed around drive shafts, factories could now spread out, allowing natural light and air to be part of the workspace. People had control over which machines ran and when, which created autonomy and flexibility, which would eventually transform the way workers were recruited, trained, and paid. Quality and quantity soared, and manufacturing productivity grew as never before. We believe that we face a similar challenge in implementing modern-day AI technologies into our existing health and life science systems. Technology is likely necessary, but it is massively insufficient. As we've observed over and over, substituting point technology solutions does not make much of a difference, and we must consider a fundamental redesign of our digital platforms, our decision-making processes, our economic motivations, as well as our organizations, and how each of these constituent parts interact with each other. Within Microsoft Health Futures, we believe the future of healthcare will be data-driven, predictive, and precise. We live in a unique moment in which we have the opportunity to converge medicine, biology, and technology at scale. More so than any other moment in history, this opens the power of possibility and the opportunity to transform healthcare and make a difference in the lives of patients and the public we serve. As we've seen with the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, truly amazing scientific advances are possible when technology, health research, and the larger policy and regulatory community come together. Within a year of COVID's emergence, we as a community had mapped the molecular mechanism of the COVID infection, developed home-based molecular diagnostics, and even created and distributed multiple vaccines. But the pandemic also illustrated gaps in our health systems, where patients and researchers continue to battle long COVID, where institutions struggle to communicate around the needs of the common set of patients they care for, where shortages of healthcare workers and suboptimal workflows impede care, where data remains locked in protected silos and fragmented analytics make it difficult to make sense of it all, and where healthcare delivery is not equitably accessible. These and many other challenges in healthcare and the life sciences await our attention. At Microsoft, we see our role as technology provider, innovator, and ecosystem builder. We seek to partner with the best of the best, emerging and incumbent organizations within the health and life sciences with a similar appetite for transformation, with complementary expertise, and who have the commitment to pursue the change required. We've had great success in being translators who can seamlessly traverse biology and chemistry on the one hand, and computing on the other. and we've seen new problems and solutions emerge from iteratively running the cycle. Speaking of the best and the evolution of technology in healthcare and the life sciences, we've arranged a quick chat with two amazing leaders in the field. Najat Khan is Chief Data Science Officer and Global Head of R&D Strategy and Ops at Janssen, as well as co-chair at the Johnson & Johnson Data Science Council. Between her PhD in organic chemistry and her current gig at J&J, she was also senior principal at the Boston Consulting Group, where she spawned a number of strategic initiatives across healthcare, data science, and digital practices. Najat's a leader, close colleague, collaborator, and with multiple of our groups here at Microsoft, and has been a prescient connector of science, technology, research, and practice, especially in the areas of therapeutic discovery and development. Also with us, Anthony Philippakis is Chief Data Officer and runs the Data Sciences platform at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, as well as co-director of the Schmidt Center out there. And MD, PhD, I believe in biophysics out of Harvard. He trained as a cardiologist at Brigham and Women's Hospital, focusing on rare genetic diseases. He also spends time with Google Ventures with an eye towards computational biology and genomics opportunities. Anthony himself is also an amazing leader, colleague, and collaborator. And Anthony thrives at the intersections of technology and medicine, science and practice, as well as everything from the strategic to the very tactical and operational. Hey, Najat and Anthony, thanks so much for joining us today. To open, I thought it'd be great if both of you would provide some color on your respective journeys. Perhaps a little bit about what you actually do, if you've always known this has been where you end up and what you'd be doing, and perhaps some of the critical steps and critical realizations of turning points along the way. Maybe we can start with Najat.
Yeah, no, thanks, Desney. I mean, definitely if somebody asked me 5 years ago, 3 years ago, or 10 years ago, this is what I'd be doing, I don't think this is exactly what I had in mind. Because the reality is, if you look in the healthcare space, a role like this didn't really exist a few years ago. But let me just take a step back. For me, I grew up on 3 continents before the age of 17. So the US, of course, but then also in Bangladesh and in the UK. And really seeing the health inequality, the impact of not having the right medicines and also not having the right access to medicines, and the cost of healthcare is something that instilled in me very early on the need to not only drive advancement to improve the health of humanity, but to do it by using new disciplines that haven't been integrated yet. So fast forward a few years, my background, while I did do organic chemistry, a lot of it was actually computational, just to understand how do you actually design these molecules in a different way that's not purely empirical. So it's a build on what we have learned to do so far. The other aspect, I also did a lot of work actually in Bangladesh and global public health, in my teens and in my 20s. And the focus was a lot about capturing the advances in digital and telemedicine to actually improve how you provide access. So again, changing that physician-patient relationship that you talked about earlier, Desney. So for me, therefore, it's been this long, non-linear approach that has converged into science and medicine, computer science, but then also having that business acumen, which I think is really important. Something I worked on a lot my 7-8 years at BCG, where I was a senior principal and then actually a partner, looking not just at R&D, but commercial, supply chain, the private equity space, the investment side, and also payer provider, to understand how does the entire healthcare system work. Because like you said about, I think you had an example about, the Edison's invention and how long it took to become real, is because you actually have to change the current ways we work today. Because if you don't change those workflows, you can't really integrate the advances, for instance, in data science and science effectively. So understanding the whole of the healthcare system is also really important. So today, to pull that all together, what I do is, on one hand, my role is the global head of R&D strategy and operations there. My role is to set the direction of one of the largest healthcare companies in the world, near term, long term, portfolio decisions, which is around which medicines do we bring forward? How do we make investment calls? How do we do the right, external opportunities and make the tough calls internally based on a data-driven approach? So being that deep into the strategic priorities from a medical perspective, scientific perspective, and then coupling that with the data science role, which is where do we apply AI, machine learning, real world evidence, digital? We'll talk more about it in a fit for purpose way to advance that portfolio for the benefit of patients. So that's why I love what I do now, because it pulls together the business aspect, the scientific and medical, and the data science advances, again, with the patient in the center.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's wonderful watching and learning from you as you approach the holistic problem. And I suspect Anthony will have a very similar sort of storyline with very different specifics. But Anthony, want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I was just saying, Najat, you really kind of took a lot of the words right out of my mouth. My path in life was I started off as a math nerd. So I did my undergrad at Yale and then did a master's in math at Cambridge University. At the time, was very pencil paper kind of stuff, not even any programming. I loved it. I still love working on math in my attic. At Cambridge, I definitely realized I was not going to win a Fields Medal, and I should probably find a somewhat more applied field to go into. And I was there right as the Human Genome Project was ramping up. I had always been interested in medicine, had a grandfather that was a doctor that I looked up to, and kind of just made a life decision that because of the genome, there'd probably be interesting things for a math nerd to do in medicine. So did my MD PhD at Harvard and then residency and fellowship at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And for those of you who aren't in medicine, when you're a resident and fellow, you're poor. So everyone is looking to moonlight and get some extra money on the side. I had the very fortuitous opportunity to become a venture partner at GB when I was a cardiology fellow, which now that I know what the job is, I definitely realized I had no business having it at that stage of my life. This was almost exactly 10 years ago. And it had a really big impact on my life in two ways. One is, I think until that point, I had always imagined myself being a very traditional academic medicine person, have a lab, write grants. But being inside of GV, I actually was very caught off guard by how much I enjoyed business. And I really respect what Najat was saying, that business acumen is actually an incredibly important and valuable skill. And I was really caught off guard by how interesting I found the business world to be. And then also being inside of a big tech company, I'd kind of roam the halls and I'd meet these people with job titles like product manager or site reliability engineer. So I realized at that stage of my life that, if you dropped me in the middle of a big tech company and said you have all the incredible resources of this organization at your disposal and, go change healthcare, I would totally flounder because I didn't understand the basics of how software was made in a grown-up world. So I spent a couple of years actually as a product manager at the Broad, learned a lot about sort of running a backlog and grew up. And then about 7 years ago, became the chief data officer. And, much like Najat, and I think what you said really resonates, which is really trying to be at the interface between three fields of medicine, technology, and business, and trying to kind of always straddle that three-legged stool is really what I find most interesting and exciting.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, very similar stories, different instantiations, and wonderful applications. One of the things that's impressed me most about both of you and your work and your organizations is, first off, the purity of focus on human impact. That's been super impressive to watch both your organizations go after this. But maybe digging in a little bit, I think you guys have been some of the most successful folks in applying data science, computation, machine learning, artificial intelligence to achieve your respective outcomes. So wondering if you could say a little bit about how you think about the new world of technology, data science, machine learning, AI, in the work you do, and maybe specifically comment on some of the things you've done to facilitate the end-to-end pipeline from innovation and science all the way through practice. I don't know, maybe we'll flip orders. Anthony, perhaps you care to comment first?
Yeah. So I guess, one of the things that I think about is there's one part of my function at the Broad that's very operational and often very much centered on engineering. And there's another side that's much more innovation oriented, and that's often the side that's much more focused on data science and machine learning. And it's interesting, when I first became the chief data officer at the Broad, um, on the engineering side, I felt like I kind of learned how to do agile product management, and you kind of learn about a backlog and story points and stuff. And not to claim that I'm an engineering manager master, but a month or two in, I kind of felt, or not a month, a couple of years in, I kind of felt like, okay, I can make an intervention and read out the results and see if things are working. But the data science team always drove me crazy, because it would not work, it would not work, it would not work, and then suddenly one day it's working, and I couldn't predict it, and I felt really frustrated. And so I asked a friend to introduce me to a lot of people who were builders of great ML teams, and had a lot of conversations, but one really stood out to me. It was Eric Colson, who's the chief analytics officer at Stitch Fix. And I talked to him about my problem. He's like, well, I bet it's not as bad as you think it is. There's two kinds of organizations. There's the kind that's optimized for execution. And if you lead one of those organizations, a lot of what you have to do is prioritize. And you're always telling your team, focus, focus, focus. And when a new opportunity comes along, you have to kind of bat it away. And then the other kind of organization is one that's optimized for learning. And if you lead that kind of organization, a lot of your time has to be saying to your people, have you thought about this? Have you explored this? Have you talked to this person? Because the worst thing you can do is kind of prematurely anchor on a suboptimal solution that your competitor then goes on to find. And so I thought this is very good advice. And I think even in the startup world, you see this, where we start software companies which have much more business risk and execution risk with tiny amounts of money, and you just give them just enough money to let them get to their next round of funding. And from the day one, you're building into them the mindset prioritize. Whereas funding a biotech, the last thing you want to do is have someone not do an experiment that would kill a program that's doomed to fail early on because they're trying to save money. So those you tend to start with, $50, $100, $200 million. So yeah, I think one of the biggest things I've learned is this being able to flip back and forth of when am I leading an effort that's optimized for learning, and when am I leading an effort that's optimized for execution.
That's great. Najat?
Yeah, I mean, no, I think that was actually really, really good advice. I was just reflecting a little bit, in a large pharmaceutical company, and Desney, you and I, have talked over the years. I had to take there's so much talk about data science, right? If you think about it, like the financial industries have done it. Why hasn't healthcare done it? Like you always hear that contrast. But I think it has to come down to how do you get followership, true followership to buy into integrating data, integrating, not doing a cool project off to the side and then saying, hey, look, we've checked the box, J&J does data science. You don't want that to be happening. So for me, it always starts with what are you trying to solve for? The what, right? And that comes from the pipeline. To me, the data science strategy and the pipeline strategy, portfolio strategy is one and the same. Because if it's not focused in some way to advance those programs, then then how are we actually creating value? And value is created in two ways, which is something that I focused a lot on when I took on the role a few years ago, which was normally when you talk about data science, people first go to, can you do things more efficiently? That's not the primary focus. That's a side product and a side benefit, and that's great. But what actually is much more important is that you do something you couldn't do before. So you find a target and you find the right pocket, design the right molecule to modulate it, to perturb it, like you were saying before, Desney, that you couldn't do before. That is the highest value add, because then it increases your chances of success as you go through clinical trials, hopefully have a medicine, and all the way to patients. I say that because I had a strategic decision to make early on. Where do you start? You can start in discovery, which is finding the right target, finding the right molecule. You can start in clinical development, which is how do you ensure that these late stage programs run really well, and maybe you do the programs faster, maybe you are able to predict which patients would benefit more. So what we did is a 70-30. Think about it as a diversified portfolio that you have. So we said, let's do a few of them in a large portion in the beginning, in the development space and pick problems diversified where you can actually have solutions and show the value quickly to get that momentum, that traction. And that was really key for us. I mean, it's different for every organization. For us, it was really important so that you get buy-in in terms of, okay, what can data science do when it's a core part of a program? Then, as soon as those were done, they were always set up for scale. You figure out one thing, you scale it up across the entire portfolio, and that's the value of being a large company because you have so many other programs that are going on. The other thing I'd say is it was also important. I mean, how do you build your team? So Anthony was talking about how do you build that ML ops team? Do you do execution? Do you do learning? Kind of got to do both, like you were saying, you go back and forth, but it's the team and having the team, as I always say, be bilingual, right? They had to know enough about science to have the credibility to integrate the data science aspect. Finding those folks, building that team is probably one of the hardest things you can do, but that's how you change culture. And I think that's where, when I look across the industry, a lot of the times data science teams tend to be like siloed. But I think that's how we're unique because it's a unique role. You're overseeing the heart of strategy, portfolio decisions, and you're doing data science. So you can actually integrate those two and make that part of your central strategy. And I think that's something, like Desney, like you and others do really, really well. It's part and parcel of what you do, and it's not an add-on. And I think that's what has been the focus. Like, let's not have it be an add-on. Let's not try to take over everything. Focus first on areas you can show success, and I can share some examples, and then expand and scale with the buy-in from the broader organization. And maybe one last thing I'll say, autonomy is important when you're doing something early on, because as we all know, if you're trying to convince everyone that something's going to work, that is still a part of a learning experiment, you'll wait many years before you can even get going. And that's one thing, when I took on the role, I said, this is really important. The data science has its own strategy, budget, team, top tier team. It cannot be fragmented because you have to have a really high level of rigor. We have to have a high bar for ourselves. And I think that is also extremely important. A very distributed model has its advantages, but one of the disadvantages is you can't harness the entire power and actually scale and have high rigor. So those were a few things that we thought about. And maybe, one last thing is the partnerships. When you're building a startup early, or a startup in a large company, like I like to call it, early on, you can't get all the talent and all the data sets and everything. So we partnered a lot. But they're very strategic win-win partnerships. And we have that with Desney's team as well, where we actually get like really smart minds together. And sometimes I forget who sits on what team to solve problems. And so you don't have to do it all on your own. And I think that's a very true philosophy for J&J. We're very agnostic to where the smart idea comes from. And so that's the other thing that helped building from what was a 5-person team 2 years ago to what's over 100, 150-person team. You don't want to do it alone because there's so many smart people outside as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. While I have both of you here, I can't help but ask, you guys have different views into the totality of the industry. For comments on sort of what you think scientific, technological, or business advancements that you're most excited about are, and perhaps as well some of the key challenges you see and that you like more people focusing on or working on. Feel free to jump in, either of you.
Sure, happy to jump in. I would say it depends on which stage of that development value chain you're looking at, right? So if I start from a discovery perspective, where you're trying to figure out what's the right target, I mean, this is the holy grail. You want to start with the right problem and identify the right problem. There, I mean, it's the age old having really good longitudinal data sets that are not just genomic, but actually you have multi-omic data connected to your real world data. And what I mean by that is, electronic health records, claims, whatever it might be, having that at a longitudinal level, that is still challenging. Now, there are data sets like UK Biobank, Our Future Health, that are being developed, but I would almost say they're not being developed quickly enough, and also with the right amount of diversity if you look at it, underlying diversity. So that would really help, because I think if we have data sets like that, the way we not only identify target, but actually stratify patients can change significantly. And we have examples, and there are examples in industry where you're actually able to do that, whether you're using imaging, whether you're using omics data, whatever it might be. So I think that's really important. We internally have leveraged AI and machine learning to actually identify some new targets that are now preclinical programs. So this is no longer an idea. We're actually starting, and remember, the bar is very high to take something that's a very different approach and make it into a program, right? That's a huge hurdle. So the fact that we have a few that are already going in speaks to that. And we actually have a partnership with the Broad Institute, Anthony, looking at, both, especially in the oncology space, looking at, genetic variants that you may have, but then also on better understanding some of the complex molecular pathways to then be able to send from some of the screening data that we have to be able to identify new and next generation targets using AI and machine learning. So it's a beautiful partnership where we leverage a lot of the data we have and what's there in the public fora, but then also these new approaches. So that's one piece I would say, but we need more of that. I think the second thing, there's been so much around molecular design, small molecules, large molecules, biologics. I think there we have good public data. There's good predictions happening. There's X folds, as I call them, so many folds that have been launched. But we still have areas that we need to resolve better, such as better understanding, better predicting the flexible loops of a protein. We're still not where it needs to be, right? The binding pockets, the dynamic conformations. All of these areas require us to have better crystal structures, better ground truth data to train our algorithms. So I think the more the industry can come together to do that would help us make even more progress in this space. And partnering with academic institutions that are doing a ton in this area. And then the last thing I'll say, when it comes to the clinical development space, there is a couple of things that would help us a lot. We now have algorithms, for instance, using AI machine learning, where we can actually predict the mutation by looking at a digital histopathology image. Think about it. Actually using a phenotype to be able to predict the genotype. That's great. And why is that important? Because a lot of these new mutations are not actually sequenced in the real world. So how do you close that gap? You use data that's already collected today, digitize it, run the algorithms to find patients that are a match. However, one of the challenges is, how do you ensure that these are integrated in the workflow and you change practice? You said concept to practice, right? All the way to practice. How do you change those behaviors? To get institutions to actually have the infrastructure to do this on a consistent basis is going to be the next frontier for us to actually have the impact at scale. We also have an algorithm that we developed that we just got breakthrough device designation from the FDA for detecting pulmonary hypertension using an AI algorithm that focuses on ECGs. ECGs is something that a lot of people commonly get, but this is a rare disease, so people get misdiagnosed for multiple years. Great for patients, but how do we ensure in the hospital system, in practice, how do we close the gap between research and care? That's what I'm trying to get at. And I think that's the next frontier for us, because a lot of these algorithms are coming through. In order to do that, not only do you need adoption, but you also need better ways of ensuring that there's monitoring of these algorithms. So there's no drift. If the standard of care changes, how are you evolving? So it takes a lot of care and effort to do that. So I think those are just some examples. And then the last one I'd say, listen, guidance from regulators, right? There's more guidance from the FDA, from the European agencies, also Asian government regulatory agencies as well. We need to do more there. We need to have more forums for pre-specification engagements so that when we start developing these digital endpoints for neurological diseases, speech, gait, we can have earlier discussions to make sure they're part of a trial that actually helps the patient in the real world, instead of being exploratory, because we're not really going to have the impact if it's only like a nice to have. It has to be central to what we do. So I think those, whether it's data, algorithm, adoption, and then also policies, all of that needs to kind of evolve collectively for us to take this to the next
Yeah, so really insightful, Najat. When I think about the role of AI and machine learning in drug development, I kind of think that there are three problems to solve, which is how do you better find a target? How do you better find a molecule? And then how do you better find a patient that will benefit? And so and each of them I think is an incredibly exciting moment right now. So when you think about targets, I think one of the great wins of the 21st century has been complex trait human genetics. If you go back to 2007, let's say, there were less than 10 loci in the genome that were reliably associated with common diseases, by which I mean non-Mendelian diseases. And today, depending on how you count, that number is over 500,000. And again, some of the best targets that we have come from human genetics. But one of the challenges we face as a community right now is that of those 500,000 loci that we know are associated with common diseases, for less than 10 of them do we understand the mechanism by which the variant impacts physiology. And so I think one of the big challenges and where there's tremendous opportunities to leverage machine learning is in being able to go from a variant to its molecular and physiologic functions. And here we're starting to see the rise of a lot of orthogonal data sets such as single-cell genomics, as well as lots of spatial transcriptomics and imaging technologies that I think are really accelerating progress there. So I think that's the first bucket. So when you think about the second bucket of picking a molecule, I think it's fair to say that this is the golden age of that field, where the ability to do either small molecule screens or protein design using modern machine learning tools is incredibly exciting. Not to mention breakthroughs like AlphaFold, which again, I didn't actually expect to be alive when the protein folding problem was solved. So, pleasantly surprised that happened so early. The area where I think there's been less effort, however, and that I'd like to see a lot more is the use of machine learning algorithms to better select not just what patients will get disease, but what patients will most respond from specific therapies. One of the things that disappoints me is that the last 20 years of drug development have been largely centered on cancer and rare diseases. Not to say that we shouldn't be putting a lot of effort into addressing those terrible illnesses, but when you look at the number of pharmaceutical companies that want to go after one of the 10 leading causes of death in the world, things like diabetes, coronary artery disease, stroke, COPD, the number is getting less and less every year. And the real problem is the high cost of common disease clinical trials. It can take more than $1 billion to run a cardiovascular outcomes trial. But I think there's real advances where we are starting to see the rise of being able to better select patients that will most benefit from therapies. There was a very nice series of papers out of Regeneron and Amgen a few years ago where they showed that if you take people at high polygenic risk, the relative risk reduction by going on a PCSK9 inhibitor went from 15% to 45%, so almost a tripling of the relative risk reduction, which is quite striking, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So those are the three areas where I kind of tend to think about the role of machine learning in drug development.
Thanks for your work, Najat and Anthony. Thanks for your leadership in the field. Thanks for your collaboration. And thanks very much for spending time with us today and sharing your thoughts. I think the audience will vastly appreciate the holistic view you guys take on the field, everything from science to technology to business, encompassing culture and partnerships and the ecosystem that we have to build to collectively solve the problems that are ahead of us and to expose the opportunities that we believe are ripe for the picking. Thanks also to the audience, our global audience, for listening in. We've got a pretty amazing schedule in today's Health and Life Sciences track, as well as the rest of the Microsoft Research Summit. So we hope to see you guys around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Desney.
Thanks, Desney.